Hi, welcome to another Adobe InDesign workshop. This time we're going to be investigating the animation functions. Whilst InDesign isn't going to turn you into a super duper animator like Nick Park or Walt Disney, it can do some pretty cool things to make your interactive EPUBs really dynamic and engaging. I've started off by just changing my workspace around a little bit. I've closed some things that I know I'm not going to be using and left other things open. And I've also opened up animation, object states, buttons and forms and timing and my EPUB preview, which I've accessed by going to Window and Interactive. So if you're looking for those things, there they all are. So you can just open them up and add them into your bar over here. I'm now going to create a new document. So I'm really going at this from scratch. So I'm going to make this new document A4. Now I'm going to make it a print document. Now it's not going to become a print document, but I don't know if you're a bit like me. I just struggle to work in pixels these days. With different resolutions, a pixel just isn't a pixel anymore. You can say 30 pixels and expect it to be a certain size, and it isn't necessarily. So I'm going to be measuring in millimeters. I understand what a millimeter looks like. But because I'm choosing a print document, there are a couple of things you have to bear in mind. The default in InDesign is to stick facing pages on. We do not want that. So first things first, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to change my orientation to landscape, just because screens like computer screens and what have you are already in that landscape format. Phones and iPads and other tablets and devices can usually be rotated. So I like this format very much. I'm just going to leave it on one page. We'll probably add some pages as we go if necessary. And I'm going to just pop up my columns to 9. So I'm just going to stick 9 columns on there. I'm going to make my gutter width 4 millimeters. And I'm going to change my margin guides to about 15 millimeters all round. Like so, they are all linked together at the moment. So that was nice and easy. And I don't think I've really got anything else to do. I don't need to worry about bleed and slug. I can preview this if I want to, so that's what my page is going to look like, and that's pretty much how I want it to be. So I'm going to just click create, and there it is. And I'm going to start off by dropping a couple of images onto the page. Now I've pre-made these. So I'm just going to go to File and Place, and I'm just going to go and find where I've left them. So I'm hoping, yep. So I'm going to open this up. This was just made in Adobe Illustrator. As you can see, it's an Adobe Illustrator file. And it's here. And I'm going to start with, I'm going to put this document in this space, like so. Now, I might need to change this in a little while. You'll see why in a second. I think it's a little bit on the big side, to be fair. So I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm now going to add a background colour. So to do this, I'm going to create a frame. So I'm just going to use the rectangle tool here. You can use either of these, they're pretty much interchangeable, but I want this to be just a blue background. So I'm going to go out to the bleed up here, like so. And I'm going to go to my swatches panel, and I'm going to make a new colour swatch, and I want it to be a nice kind of dark blue. I don't work in things like lab colour. I don't really understand when I'm moving these sliders what the results are going to be. So I'm going to go to something that I do comprehend. So I'm going to use CMYK. I'm not using CMYK as my colour space, but for these sliders, colour mode, this is good enough. So I'm going to have 100% cyan, and no yellow, and a fair amount of blue because I want it to be kind of nice and dark, and a little bit of black, so it's almost up towards the navy. So I've ended up with 100% cyan, 68% magenta and 52% black. But as long as you're reasonably close to those kind of measurements, it should be fine. I'm going to call this dark blue so I can identify it easily, and click OK. And there we go. Now, because I created that after I put my image in, it's now on top. So I need to just shuffle around my layers. So I'm just going to spin these layers open and just drag that rectangle so it sits at the bottom like so. And then I'm going to lock it because I don't want to accidentally pick this up and move it. So to lock it, I just come into this little space over here next to where the visibility toggle is, and if I just click in there, you can see it'll put a little padlock, and that is now locked into place. So no matter how much I try, I can't accidentally pick that up and shift it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring in some bits to animate. Now I am going to make this a little bit smaller, I think, so I'm going to pick it up from here, and I'm just going to move that to about there, and then I'm just going to go to Object and fill that frame proportionally so it's a bit smaller. So you can see I've just missed off these first two columns. I think that's probably a better size for this. I'm just going to close my libraries down. There we go. So that's what my page is looking like so far. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in some spheres that I've made, okay? And I've made these in Illustrator, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File and choose Place. Okay, now I see people, I'm going to bring in all of them. Well, no, I'll just bring in one just to show you something first of all. This is what happens when you place something. Now this has been created in Illustrator with some transparency applied in Illustrator, and you can see here, if I move this over, you can see through it. Okay, so that transparency comes into InDesign from Illustrator without any problems at all, as long as you go to File and Place. So if I just pop into Illustrator, like so, you can see the sphere, and this has got transparency applied to it. But if I copy it, so I'm going to use, I'll show you on the menu, so I'm going to copy this and then pop back into InDesign and paste. So if I go to Edit and choose Paste into InDesign, you can see that the transparency didn't come with it. Okay, so that's why it's important that we use that fill command. Oh, that's unusual. So there we go. So that's why we use place, because any attributes that have been applied to it in Illustrator or Photoshop will come through by importing that way. Okay, so I've positioned this this bubble, if you like, this sphere down here, and I'm going to bring in some more. So I'm just going to go to back to place, and I've got 3 more, so spheres 2, 3 and 4, and I'm going to make them all different sizes. They're all essentially the same document, but it's just easier to import if I've got 4 separate things. So I'm going to pop one there, and I'm going to make a little tiny one here. Like so. And maybe one that's a little bit bigger, or maybe another small one. There we go. So you can make them whatever size you like and position them roughly in this bottom right hand corner. Now what I want to do with these is I want to animate them so they kind of drop in from the top. and end up in this position down here. So to do this, I need to move them first of all. I'm going to put them up here. So I'm just going to pick them up. I'm going to position them just off the page. Oops, a daisy. Like so. There we go. And if I hold the shift key, it will constrain them so they'll just move straight up there. So they're just off the page. Now be careful that you don't push them too far, especially if you're doing this on a page that isn't the first page in your document. If you do this on page 2 or 3 and you push too far, you'll end up just pushing them onto the previous page rather than into the pasteboard of the page that you're working on. So this is going to be my starting location for these. I'm going to animate them one at a time. So I'm going to just click on this large one first of all and open up my animation panel. And I'm going to choose a preset, and the preset I'm going to use is bounce vertical. Okay, and you can see this little animation of how that's going to play out. Now you can also see this green line down here. Now this is the motion path, and it shows that this is going to be the starting point. Okay, so this bottom edge of the sphere is going to go from here to the tip of the motion path. Now that's not where I want it to go. So what I need to do is I need to select the motion path. Oops, a daisy. There we go. So I need to pick up the tip of the motion path. So I'm using the direct selection tool to do, oh, she says. There we go. There we are. So I'll pick up the tip of the motion path, and I'm going to drag it down to the place where I wanted it. And I was just going to have it resting on this margin guide here, like so. And if I want to preview that, if I just open up the preview, and let's see what this looks like. So that's how that is going to play. I want the same thing to happen to the others, so I'm going to animate all of these as well. So again, I'm going to use bounce vertical and oops, pick up the tip of the motion path and drag it down to that margin guide. And I'm going to continue doing that. Bounce vertical again. And then this teeny one on the end, bounce vertical. And then just drag that motion path. And let's see how that looks. So I'm just going to replay the animation. Okay, so everything's animated, but it's not really happening in the way that I want. It's rather slow. Each sphere comes down one at a time. The animation has to finish playing before the next animation takes place. So I want to change that. I want all these things to happen at the same time, more or less. So let's see if I can make that happen. So I'm going to just click on this first sphere, hold down the shift key and select the other three. And then I'm going to go to my timing panel, and you can see here that all the spheres are here. And if I select them all in here and click this little icon down here, you can see when I hover over it, it says play together. So let's see what that gives us now. Run it again. Okay, so that's exactly what I asked for, but now it looks really artificial and not quite right. So let's go back to the timing panel and see what we can change. Well, I'm going to leave polymer sphere 1, or this one up here, just as it is. and I'm going to change this one slightly. So this one I'm going to adjust the speed so it happens a fraction of a second later. So I'm going to go for 0.2 seconds later, and then this one I'm going to go for 0.3, and this one is going to be 0.4. Now let's see how this looks. That's more like it. Okay, so that's happening just as I want it to now. All right. So what I want to do with this is I want to make the most of my pages. So this is a title page effectively, and if you're restricted to the number of pages you can have within a document, say it's a university project and you have to produce something using a maximum page number of pages, then it might be that you can use this for your title page, and you might also use it maybe as an introduction or a contents page, something like that. So what we need to do is kind of clear the decks a little bit. So we can do that using animation, and we can make it happen in a way that looks good. So what I want to do is I want this as a kind of little title that's going to sit up at the top here. So I'm going to animate this first of all. So let's open up the animations panel and see the kind of things that we can utilize to make that happen. So I want it small, so that's a little clue. So I could use something called shrink. Okay, now in my animation panel, if I open up where it says properties, you can see we've got some more controls down here. Now at the moment, if I were to preview this, let's have a little look and see what it looks like. So all the spheres land, and then that kind of shrinks down into the middle. There's also a weird speed thing going on, and it's shrinking into the wrong place. Now we can control all of that. So I want it to shrink up to this top left-hand corner. In fact, I quite like it up here, but we'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to go to my animation panel again, and you can see this. Now this is the to change the point of origin. So I want it to scale up to this point here. So I'm going to just click in this top right-hand corner of this little device here, and that's going to change the point of origin. I also want to be able to control the speed. I want it to be more measured, and that's because there's a preset on this because I've used a ready-made animation, and I want to change that, and I'm going to change it to none. So let's see how this looks now. Okay, well that's better. It doesn't go quite small enough, and I want it further over. So to be able to control that, I want to change where this frame is. Oops, be careful about that. I'm just going to use, so when you can see the blue frame, in my case, that's the frame and not the image itself, and I'm going to just take that all the way out to the edge. And maybe up to there. Let's see what this looks like. It might be a bit too far over now. Oh no, that looks pretty good. I just wanted to go a tiny bit smaller, so let's see how we do that. So I want to make it smaller. It's scaling currently to 1/4 of its original size, 25%. So I want to take that down to maybe 18%, like so. And let's see where we end up. Yeah, that's pretty good. I also want this blue background to disappear. Now, if you remember before, I locked it into position. That was so I didn't disrupt it while I was doing my animations. But now I need to unlock it. So I'm going to go to Layers and unlock this, this layer, and select that rectangle, so I've just clicked on this little box here to make sure that it's selected, and I'm going to animate this. Now this, I don't want it to shrink or anything like that, I just want it to kind of gently disappear. So I'm going to use another preset. I'm going to not use appear and disappear, but I'm going to use fade out. Okay, and you can see it says fade out on page load, and everything else looks like it's going to be just fine. Change the speed again. Let's see how this looks this time. Okay, so that's pretty much where I want to end up. But I want to be able to control some of these things. I want the spheres to drop down as the page loads, but I want my logo here, or my title, to shrink and the background to disappear when I say so. In other words, I want to be able to control it with a button. So the first thing I need to do is introduce a button. So I've got something pre-made, so I'm going to go to File and choose Place. And again, this is something I just made in Illustrator. These are all Illustrator files, and it's a little start button. I'm going to pop it right in the middle, so I've one column width, like so. So this is going to become a button. All right. Buttons can be any images or pieces of text. They can't be videos and sound files. That's your restriction there. So this is going to become a button. It's not a button at the moment, so I'm going to go to my Buttons and Forms menu, and I'm going to add an action. And the action is to trigger an animation. And the animation I want to trigger is I want the Polymer Adventures animation, that's what it's called, to play at that point. I also want this button to control the blue background as well. So I'm going to add another action to the same button, and this time we are going to animate the rectangle. Okay. Now the problem is, when I first made these animations, they were triggered on page load, and that's still true. Okay, so what I need to do now is go to each of the animations. So I've just selected this blue background, and when I go to the animation panel now, I need to remove where it says on page load. So I'm just going to take that off, and then I'm going to do the same thing with my title. Take on page load off, and when I go to my EPUB interactivity preview, let's see what we have now. So those little bubbles come down on page load, and everything else is just sitting there waiting for me to do something. And then there's a nice little button here, it says start. When I press that, sure enough, that all works nicely. Now the thing is, the button itself is white, and so is the background, so it looks like the button isn't there, but of course it is. So I need to do something that gets rid of that button after it's been pressed. In order to get rid of the button, what we need to do is we need to animate it. So I'm just going to click on this and create an animation. I just want it to disappear. So I'm going to choose disappear, and after this animation has happened, I want to choose this, hide after animating. If you don't do that, even though it's apparently disappeared, the action is still in that zone. So what I need to do is just choose that, and then I need to add that animation to itself, to the button. So I need to go back to my buttons panel and add another action to this button. So I'm going to choose animation, and this time I'm going to choose button 1. And let's see how this behaves for us. So there we go. So if I press the button, and now if I try and press the button, nothing happens. So I am pressing that. Okay, and that's that. Okay, so there it is, and it will just sit there like that until I'm ready. It's disappearing too soon because it's still happening on page load. So I just need to go back to that and choose animation and take on page load off. And then let's just check that out properly. So far so good. Yep, that looks good. Click the button and there you are, it's gone. So that's that bit. So now we can clear the page and begin putting other stuff in our space. But the problem is now we've got a bit of clutter on the page, so it's very difficult to relay out this page while there's so much going on. So what I'd be inclined to do is everything that I've got here in this layer is keep it there and make a new layer. So I'm going to make this new layer, and I might call this introduction layer. Like so. And then I can close this layer up and I can lock it and hide it. Okay, so I can't inadvertently move anything just now and it's all hidden, so I can completely move through this without it causing me any real grief. Okay, so I'm going to bring in some text, I think. So I'm going to use a text frame, or I might actually have some text ready created. So I'm going to pop this into place here, and I'm going to just style this up. I'm going to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go to the type menu, and I could use a character style. I'll just use character for now so I can access plenty of things. So I want it to be a bit smaller, and I think I'll change the typeface. We'll have it in, I quite like Gill Sans, so there's Gill Sans, and I think we could do with some columns in here. That looks a little bit nicer. So I'm going to add some columns. There we are, I've got 3 columns. I'm just going to make this, there we are. So that looks okay. And I'm going to change how this looks. So I'm going to go to paragraph styles. Let's see what else I've got here. So I'm going to use a drop cap. I think I'll drop it over. Let's preview this. There we are. Yeah, I quite like how that looks. And I could make all that copy a different colour. I'm going to just go for a tint of black because I just think it looks a bit nicer, like so. And I'm going to make this that dark blue colour, so there it is. So that kind of mirrors what we had previously. Just going to stretch this out a little bit. We need to show up our layers again, so I'm going to unlock that and bring those back in. And I don't want this text to appear until everything else has settled down. So now I'm going to animate this text. So this is going to appear, so it's going to fade in, and because it's the last thing that I animated, it will fade in after everything else has finished. Okay, so, and I don't want it to fade in on page load, so let's just add to this button. So buttons and forms, add another action, and it's another animation, and it's this piece of text. So now there's my animation. Okay, it's coming in still too soon because I haven't taken off the on page load on the animation, so I'm just going to remove that. This is why we need to preview stuff. Okay, so there go the spheres. Okay, no sign of the text, so now I click the button, everything shrinks, and my text appears. So that's basically showing you how you can utilize a title page for more than one thing using some fabulous animations in Adobe InDesign. I hope you've enjoyed this workshop.